to accomplish. It's also who you're meant to become so that you can make an impact by being yourself. We're all here to unlock our potential and create positive change in the world. Everything starts with you. One is not born into their purpose. One steps into their purpose. Were you born to do it? Welcome to Born to Do It, a podcast about the positive change makers around us, each bringing something unique onto Earth and among humans. My guest today is a specialist when it comes to capturing the essence of a story. He's a storyteller that leads with the intuition, obviously combining logic and intuition, but kind of paving a new way of thought leaders through his example. I'm excited to welcome Issac Robledo on the podcast. Hi, Issac.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here.
It's fantastic to have you here. And I love that we connected through one of your books, Awaken the Starlight Within. What attracted you to the path of capturing stories in the first place? Do you remember how old you were when you first wrote a story?
I mean, the kind of storytelling that I've done more, like in my books, is mainly thoughtful storytelling. I would like more. I'd say it's more. In a way, you could say that this book was like a journaling out my deeper thoughts and reflections. But what I would say is I was always attracted to the idea of writing and conveying ideas. And I mean, I remember being a kid and just wanting to, like, if I saw a journal in the store, I would just think this is me, like this is what I've got to do with my life. And it wasn't clear to me back then where that was going, but because it took a long time to get back into actually writing. But to me, it's more about the ideas and what we're trying to do with humanity and where we're trying to go. And a lot of that does end up in storytelling and crafting the right stories. But I'd say I'm more of leading into the core ideas of where things are going is what my focus usually was.
This seems to be a universal experience that we, the writers, the storytellers, were attracted to the section of the bookstores with all the journals. I remember I found my very first one and I put a label on it, number 1, because my younger self knew that this is just the very beginning. And obviously, over the years, I've chosen different means and methods to capture these stories, sometimes on paper, sometimes on my laptop, in the notes section on my phone, even virtually on social media, just talking about the ideas that I have. But it's insane how connected we are to our mission, even if we don't grasp it consciously. We just trust that inner guidance. I'm curious, before we dive into the writer's path, was there a book that inspired you? Oh, this is the kind of book that I want to write one day.
Yeah, I really like that question. There's been so many, but one that I distinctly remember being like a special experience to me at the time was actually, it was Robert Greene's Mastery, which is like, it's nonfiction, but talking about storytelling, he's a really good storyteller. He talks about, and it's been a while. It's been a while since I've read the book, but I remember he talks about a lot of really high-profile competitors and artists, and I think that's the first time I heard much about Marcel Proust, and I ended up getting into reading a little bit of his books. But just, I really like the way that he tells the stories, the way that he has a point to the stories that it's trying to help elevate you so that you can find mastery in your life. And he says it really goes along with pretty much what you talk about on your episodes too. It has to do with going with your purpose. Your mastery is, what are you going to master? It's whatever you are destined to do in this life.
How are you going to be of service? In other
Yeah,
words,
exactly. Like he doesn't just talk about mastery to go for it for success. He talks about what is the point? What is it really that you're trying to do in this life, and why are you doing it? And I was just, to me, it's funny that the book is called Mastery because it was such a masterfully done piece of work that I'd read it at least a couple times, and I always Remember that one fondly. But another big one that's influenced me was The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And I've read quite a few books from quite a few people, but those are two that really stand out to me as being influential. And that one is mentioned in the intro of my Awaken the Starlight book. Also, it was that impactful that one
Mhm.
was referenced there.
It is. When you sent me the book, I almost took it as a reminder. Oh, I need to read this book, The Four Agreements. And it's
Yeah.
interesting, we're having this conversation during the month where I'm actually reading it as part of my book club. So this is kind
Oh
of
yeah.
the
Great. Great.
the divine alignment here, because I went back to your book and I was like, let me read back the intro. In the first sentence is the
Mhm.
four agreements, and I'm like, ah,
Yeah.
I see why we were aiming to record this episode a few months ago, but it wasn't just the right time. Now is the right
Yeah.
time. So
Right.
when the universe works like that, and I think that is the power of listening to your intuition. Sometimes the idea arrives, but it's just not the right time. Whether it's about a partnership, whether it's about writing a book, or even launching your business, or even speaking about an idea, even if you're not doing something huge about it. So I'm curious to learn more about your thought process when it comes to writing, and what is the role of intuition in the writing process. Obviously, logic helps us create that structure, but sometimes it really is about trusting the unknown and allowing ourselves to flow.
Yeah. I think it may seem a bit exaggerated to say it this way, but I think really intuition is almost everything. Like that sounds like a weird thing to say, right? Almost everything, but it's practically speaking, it's everything in the writing process. Because if you want to write something that's really worthwhile, is really going to connect with people, there should be some level of intuition behind it. And the way I think of it also is that intuition is a driving force of creativity. So the way I'd explain it is pretty much everything that we do in life could, in a sense, be viewed as intuitive. Like I think a lot of the decisions we make in life, a lot of the small or daily decisions we make, especially, tend to be intuitively driven. Like somebody might say, um, I just feel like stopping at this particular restaurant right
Mhm.
now. I mean, I would say that's an intuitive thought process. But yeah, so it's a lot of intuition drives creativity, and if you're ever going to create anything, write anything, then you know, so then that's what ends up going into the writing process. Like if you don't create something, you're never going to actually write it. Like it sounds obvious the way I say it, but I think not everyone necessarily realizes that the intuition feeds into creativity, feeds into actually creating something that's worthwhile. And the truth is, it can be kind of messy because it's hard to know exactly where your intuition is taking you sometimes. But as you fine tune it, as you get better at the intuitive process, you can you can create something more more worthy. Like on the first, like theoretically, you could just on the first run have a brilliant first draft, or if you're talking about another topic, it could be a brilliant piece of artwork. I mean, there's nothing that's really stopping us from doing it. It's just if we could tap into the full intuitive power or intuitive understanding, then we could get there. I've done it at times because, I mean, at times I've created something that I thought intuitively was pretty well done on the first run. Um, but, that's not always the case, and that's okay too. It's part of the learning process.
It is. And we should be encouraged to make mistakes because they're part of the learning process. And maybe your first book is not going to be great. Maybe your first five books are not going to be great. But guess what? You're going to get better at trusting your
Mhm.
intuition, at sharing the work, because you mentioned something really crucial here for anyone that aspires to be a writer. Unless you actually share your words on a piece of paper,
Mhm.
you're not a writer. Like you have the identity as a possibility, but you haven't embodied it. And this was one of the big lessons I had to relearn around 5 years ago when I was kind of still in a marketing oriented career. And I thought to myself, if I ever get to a place where I am fulfilled and successful and happy and I've achieved my purpose, it wouldn't be because I'm pursuing marketing. It would be because I'm in a position where I can share my stories. But my
Mhm.
career trajectory wasn't guiding me there. It was guiding me to a place where I had financial security, I had a connection with people that were, lovely people, but something inside of me was missing because I was on the wrong trajectory. And somewhere along the line, sure, I trusted the intuitive guidance around me, but I also realized, oh, I might have missed on some of the signs that were kind of taking me away from who I truly am at my core.
Right.
And that mastery that we mentioned, it really has to do with how can we be of service. It's not
Hmm.
about impressing people. It's not about being the perfect grandchild or child to the family. It's about how can we truly be of service using the gift that we have. And only we know what's inside of us.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, beautiful detour, but that is life essentially. If you are encouraged to write a book, maybe it's a detour from something else, but maybe one day you're going to realize, oh, that book actually was part of my legacy, was part of my journey, was connecting me to this person or that person. And this is the challenge, I suppose, because you're right that intuition is almost everything in life.
Hmm.
How do we actually recognize the voice of intuition? And this is something that we haven't learn in school, I suppose. We haven't had these conversations with our parents, with our friends. So we hear some people on TV or on social media say, trust your intuition, trust the voice within. But how do you recognize that voice?
Yeah, and I'm really glad you mentioned that it's not taught in schools because that's exactly what's occurred to me. And my major is in psychology. I have a bachelor's in psychology and a master's in psychology. And the word intuition or the concept of it very, very rarely came up. It wasn't something that we really researched thoroughly. I'm sure some psychologists do study it. I'm not saying nobody studies it, but as a general pathway on your learning path, you don't learn much about it. But so as to your question, how do you recognize the voice of intuition? I think it has to do with tuning inward, with understanding first of all that in the way I see it is there's a baseline. Um, well, there's like a voice of society. So
Mhm.
there's a sort of voice that we all probably hear that I don't know. I'd say it might not be an actual voice that you literally hear, but sort of like an underlying message in your mind somewhere where you think about the shoulds or this is the way you're supposed to do things. This is what you should do, and this is what people of your age or of your gender or of your neighborhood or country usually do at this time. And so that's not the voice of your intuition. That's the voice of I'd say the voice of society, but
Conditioning.
conditioning society. There's different ways to see it, but yeah, basically it's the voice that's coming from the things around you, and that could play a role or it could shape your intuition. It doesn't mean that voice that societal voice isn't always wrong, but I think in order to tap into your own intuition, you need to distance yourself a little bit from that. I've heard many times of people who live, which I think it's great when people live with family. There's nothing wrong with it, but I've heard sometimes adults live with family and it can be a little bit, I think it can be a little bit like you're always hearing somebody else's point of view. Like your
Mhm.
mom thinks this, your dad thinks this, your brother's telling you that, maybe your neighbor thinks something else. And it's hard to, I would imagine in those situations, it's hard to tap into your true personal intuition of what you're supposed to do. Um, Again, I mean, I think it's great people live with family, not trying to say anything bad about that. But basically, I'm just saying that you probably need to find a little bit of personal space at some point, regardless of your family situation, regardless of where you live or what you're doing. Um, and it also happens nowadays that some people are on social media all the time or scrolling through, the internet, whatever it may be. Um, so those kind of things I think might be a distraction from our personal intuitive force. There's
Absolutely.
a time and a place for everything. I mean, I watch TV or I do different things, but the thing is, you want to have you need to check in with yourself once in a while. Are your intuitive decisions actually leading you where you want to be in life? And if not, like maybe you need to tune inward, get a little bit of personal space, reflect on your own life, maybe meditate, yoga. There's different ways people can do this. Journal. But personally, I just like to have my own space. I might turn on some music, but I'm sort of just going into my own space of not being overly concerned with what everyone else says and thinks. And I believe that that's a practice, and I'm not sure that that's taught in schools, as you said. I'm not sure that that's taught so often.
Yeah, I think the closest to classes around intuition is the classes we had on philosophy. At least
Mhm.
these were the classes that allowed us to ask some big questions and then not really take the answer as the instruction, but rather examine that answer. Does it work for us? What can we add to the story? So this subject is like in English where you had to do essays and you had to like channel some of your thoughts, which I interestingly enough, because I did journalism and creative writing for my for my bachelor degree at university, I thought, oh, this is finally the moment for me to shine with my own ideas and brilliance. But actually, I was punished for it. My
Mm.
teachers were like, you need to have academic references. You need to quote what other people said to prove your points in the essay. It's like you're teaching us to be conditioned at a higher level, essentially, which is my problem with education, not necessarily with the university that I went to, but rather why is the academic thinking considered superior to the individual thinking?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like the way I think of it is that sort of thinking has its value, but I think our personal value, I mean, the academic referencing and citation and all that has its value, but I think, in my opinion, the higher value of humans and what we can do is our intuitive abilities, because that's, again, that's where you're going to create something new and tap into a deeper part of yourself and how that connects with others. And that's also harder to teach. So it's like it's such an important skill that's not so easy to learn. I can't think of, and maybe I'll look it up after this, but I can't think of very many books on the topic of intuition either. The only one that comes to mind is, I think it was called Thinking Fast and Slow, and I'm sure there's others.
So academic.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some, but I can't think of very many. So I'm guessing it's an underexplored topic among.
I would say the books that teach us how to think for ourselves, to examine that inner world, are the self help books. And
Yeah.
I was fortunate enough to find a copy of The Alchemist in high school. I think
Uh-huh.
this was like destined for me to meet it at that time, which then I carried that book with me everywhere I went for about 10 years until
Mhm.
eventually I didn't make it on one flight. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to take you with me
Yeah.
anymore. But
Yeah.
this was the book that reminded me that sometimes you would receive these invitations from the universe and they would seem crazy to the outside world, but that is you trusting that intuition. This is a journey just for you. It's not for you and your family and your friends. It's just for you because you've
Mhm.
come here to explore a part of you and then to share a part of you that can only be possible if you take that journey for yourself. And I remember reading also The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, which was a
Mhm.
similar approach to what is society telling me I should look like in order to be successful versus
Right.
how to actually feel. And
Mhm.
one of the greatest thing about that book is that even in the introduction you're like shocked, you're like, oh, I should probably revisit my values. And this is,
Mhm.
I think, how we get to the heart of that intuition.
Mhm.
But in order to get to it, I mean, there is a little bit of darkness. You're tuning in within. You're listening to what's happening within. And again, we're not even encouraged to do that in the
Right.
society that we live in, with TV always on, with social media always on. Your favorite artist has their latest album on replay. There isn't enough space for that exploration, the space that our ancestors had.
Even with what you're saying there, like it dawns on me that it's so obvious, but our heroes are super intuition driven, but we ourselves as a general population don't know, or we don't tap into that as much. But all these super pop stars and singers, I don't know if all of them, because I don't know their career trajectories and how it works, but some of the big names are going to be super intuition driven because that's how they create their art, right? That's how they create their music.
And the way they rose to fame as well. They had that invitation that I spoke about. They, out of the blue, overnight success, but it didn't happen overnight. They were just pushing against what society was telling them. Don't pursue music. There's no money in that. Don't pursue writing. There's no money in that, which is kind of the societal conditioning, which I suppose why is the system designed that way? But that's a different conversation altogether. Um, the more you follow the voice of intuition, the more you're going to discover the duality of life. And you've captured that really beautifully in the very introduction of your book, even before we start the book. So I'd love to read that for whoever's watching or listening. You are the instrument and player, the song and singer, the pilot and passenger, the thought and thinker, the being and spirit, the writer and written, the gift and giver, the star and light. And that is what intuition reminds us, helps us to remember that we can be everything, that we already are everything, and that we are limiting ourselves. And so the logic can help us bring that structure in place for us to exist. But the more we tap into the intuition and the right side, the more we embody more of ourselves. We meet more people that can mirror back to us all that we are.
Mhm.
How did this book transform your life? Because I think this was kind of a pivotal moment in your journey to honoring intuition.
Yeah, and yeah, that's it. Really did transform my life. It really did, in the sense that I think it did all have to do with intuition, the topic that we're talking about. That I didn't realize until I wrote this particular book. I don't think I realized how deep somebody could go into intuition, to the point where one of the few places I've heard somebody even mention something kind of like what I went through is when I heard you. I forget if it was on one of your podcasts or um, where precisely that was, but you mentioned something about how um, you had sort of, in a sense, channeled your the "No One Knows Me," so your book. I don't know if that was the exact word you used, but basically you just sort of got it from another place. Um, and I would say it was something pretty much like that with me for the vast majority, if not the entire book. Even this poem, or this introductory part of the book, I'm really like, I don't know exactly where this could have come from. It doesn't, it sounds like you could say, oh, some poet from the 17th century wrote it, and I think most people would believe you. Like, okay, yeah, that's what it is. But no, I wrote it. So it's sort of something of a disbelief, not disbelief, something that I can't fully comprehend and understand
Mm.
how the book came about. I think it's only at the beginning stages of becoming, reaching the audience, or to transform their lives as well. But it's funny the way you asked this question, because writing the book itself, even if it didn't shape anybody else, it shaped me and my abilities and what I'm able to understand. And so I'm grateful it has found an audience. I mean, it has like dozens of reviews, and it's done decently. But I still feel that it's at the beginning stages of what it truly could do. Um,
Absolutely. And
yeah.
there's this mastery that happens that I suppose you cannot teach in anybody. The mastery happens when you liberate people. So you
Mhm.
liberate them from the conditioning, you liberate them from the limiting beliefs, the projections. And when you liberate people from all of that, they can tap into their own nature, their own self, their own consciousness. And when that happens, it's almost like a bank vault, and you open it, you only the secret code, the secret sequence, whatever it is, and then you open it and you see the treasure, and that treasure is yours. It's
Mhm.
like you already have that. You have that connection to your bank vault, but that bank vault is spiritual, and so you need to liberate yourself in order for you to access that. And I'm being reminded of almost Harry Potter's story, where in the
Mhm.
first book, he discovers he's a wizard. So
Mhm.
that's all of us. We're discovering that we're intuitive beings, that we're spiritual beings, that the magic that we call magic, there is a pathway to it, there is some logic to it. It's just
Mhm.
that we've lived under this illusion that life can be, we've suppressed life so much that everything outside of that is extraordinary, but we
Right.
already are extraordinary. And so when we expand, a little bit like the visual that you've used here, when we expand, the more we reconnect with all that we are. And so our intuition is probably that force that is reminding us how to unfold what's
Mhm.
already here. It's just that it's now so compressed and suppressed that logic seems to be the only way for us to continue to function until we highlight the importance of the intuition and people start to ask big questions. And those questions allow for the intuition to flow and we to flow with it. And yeah, channeling allowed me to channel my book, which is really the result of doing a lot of the inner work. And that inner work is part of the psychology, it's part of the reconditioning of one's mind.
But if I can turn the tables a little bit and ask a question, um, when somebody channels, where does that come from? I mean, you know what I mean? I don't even
Yeah.
know how to ask the question.
So the way that I'm understanding of it is you can channel from source. So you can pretty much, you can be a leader, you can be an artist, you can be a teacher, and you can say, I want to create a company, I want to create a product, a service, a lesson that allows me to do X, Y, and Z. So you're setting that intention and you're
Mhm,
asking, give me that. It's a little bit like communicating with ChatGPT or Google. You're literally asking for that solution, but you're asking the universe. It's like an open space. It's an open question. You're asking for it, and then you release it, and that's it. You continue to live your life, and the idea arrives. So that's you channeling based on how you can be of service right now with your skill set and so on. You can channel your own higher self. So there are some souls, I believe, this is my own personal belief, that there are some souls that are wiser than others because they've lived a little bit longer as a separate entity. So if we
mhm,
think of the source of all as one big giant ball of energy and all of us an expression of that,
mhm,
some of that consciousness that has separated itself, it might have traveled different planes of existence, it might have
mhm,
traveled through different vessels, different ages, without returning back to the source, just living and consuming and researching. So that's how you create the avatars, that's how you create the sages, the masters. They just continue to experience and live and research as their own entity. And so when
mhm.
they're channeling themselves, but from
Oh,
all of those experiences they've collected. And also, I suppose you can tap into the frequencies of giants like that. So you can
mhm,
tap into the frequency of Jesus Christ if you want to be a little bit more biblical and
mhm,
borrow some of that strength. You can tap into the frequency of Hercules and some of the Roman or ancient Greek
mhm,
figures and gods and create more of a mythical approach
mhm,
because we've invested so much energy to these frequencies, they keep giving back to us. So
mhm,
channeling is not just from one source. And I suppose there are some people that might have bad intentions, and
mhm,
they will also be able to tap into a source that does not bring positive change on earth, which is
mhm.
even more important now for those that want to create positive change to reunite with their own nature and seek to to be channelers of light,
Mhm.
be in
Yeah,
line
absolutely.
with your book.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's. Uh, I mean, it's a bit of a tangent, but I liked when I realized that your name is so similar to the word stellar, right? So it's like there's something in there in you that was meant to be that way.
So my name actually means star
Right.
in Latin and Italian.
Oh,
So
well, that I did not realize, but I couldn't help but notice that so similar to the word stellar. So yeah, okay, that makes sense.
yeah, and when I was little, I didn't like my name, which is a fun fact because all the other cool kids they had long names and they could have nicknames, but mine was so short you couldn't shorten it any further. I was like, I don't like my name. I wish I had a long name. But now I understand that yeah, my name had an encoding in it that would allow me one day to put the puzzle pieces together. So yeah,
Yeah,
thank you for noticing that.
yeah, absolutely. I mean,
um,
and my name, I mean, has IC in it, and it took me forever to even realize that was the case. It's like a seer, somebody who
that is true. Mhm.
perhaps is a little bit wiser. Just in my name, it's right there. I see.
Names have power, and sometimes we we don't see what's obviously in front of us because we're trying to look for the higher meaning. So
Mhm,
sometimes we are our own biggest enemies, I suppose, because we're unable to be present, which is again partially connected to being so disconnected with our own intuition.
mhm,
Which brings me back to how do we combine the process of working with our intuition and working with our logic? And how do we create that magic that happens when we unite both. And I feel like you're at the point of your career's journey now where you've experienced both, where you've been very methodological with your thinking, with your writing, and then you've allowed yourself to flow and to channel. So I'm curious to hear more about your vision for how you want to continue to write in the future as you combine the two.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the general idea of how this works in writing is, as I said, intuition, I believe, is a creative, is a driving force for creativity. And then the logic side logically has to do with the editing process or analyzing. You might write a, let's say, a chapter intuitively, but then you logically have to see, or analytically have to see, does everything really make sense? And so sort of putting on different hats, the creative side and the analytical side. But yeah, this is a very interesting question. Um, I've noticed in my career that, or in my life and career, I think I leaned a lot more towards logical or rational, or wanting everything to be logical and rational from an earlier age. But it took me a while to understand a little bit more about the intuitive side and the power of that, and maybe even, I'd say, even the limiting side of logic, that it can only, um, I mean, it might depend on everything depends on the context, right? But in many cases, the logic is sort of limiting you to a certain perspective, or in some cases, it doesn't even lead anywhere. Like, if you explore certain life issues that come up every day, there's not always a logical response. Or, I mean, here's an example. What is the next word that comes out of my mouth? Like, I think it's more intuitive driven than, oh, logically I said this, so now I must say this. Like, logic doesn't really make sense to me on that level. So if you really deeply explore so many different parts of your life, and you're a logical person, you might try to then do everything logically. But I think it starts to break down and not make sense. And the reason I'm really going on about this is because, as I said, I think when I was growing up, when I was younger, without really knowing or understanding what I was doing, I think I leaned much, much more into logic. And it's more just happened gradually over the past 10 years. I don't know. It's just a very gradual process through life, where I leaned more into intuition. And I didn't always think of it as that word, even as, oh, this is intuition. But that's what it was. I mean, it's good to have labels and words for things, because then you can more concretely say, oh, I'm going to explore my intuition, because that's a valuable thing to do. And that concrete way of looking at it, of me wanting to explore intuition more deeply, probably didn't happen until the past few years. But regardless, that's a direction I've been going in over the past 10 years. I figured I already have the logical, analytical abilities. So I need to dig a bit more into intuitive thinking and intuitive understanding. And we all have both, I would say, but you have to use both and know how to use them. And in writing, you really, I believe, you have to be a master of both, for most people. But intuition is the truly essential force, because I said that's creating. And if you don't have that intuition, that creation ability, you just don't create anything. Um,
Think the more I'm listening to you, the more I'm seeing two different ways to use this almost framework to honor both logic and intuition. So if you want to research a particular topic and you want to create a book that is based on the research, you can still use your intuition to kind of ask yourself these questions, or tap into the universe. As I say, ask the universe this open question, and the answer is going to arrive. Maybe the answer is going to be your friend's going to call you and say, hey, have you considered looking into this place? Hey, do you want to go with me to grab coffee from that place? And something in there is going to give you that answer, because that's how we communicate with everything around us, through the intuition. But if you want to stick to the logic as the main body of the book, that's fine. Your intuition can help you make the decisions as to who you want to work with, to edit the visual side, what type of references that you want to guide people to research next. Your intuition is still a powerful tool, even if you want to base your book using logic.
Mhm.
But if you want to use intuition to free flow, then logic is going to help you to edit, to customize the sections, and to make sense. How is this going to reach the market? How is this
Right.
positioning? So the mastery happens as a writer when you combine both. I agree with what you're saying big time.
Yeah, it combines both, and I don't know if there's any, right or wrong way to write, but in my experience, I end up flipping between both a lot. Like I might make an outline, which just seems a bit more structured and logical, but when I write, I might come up with new sections and new ideas, and not necessarily uh, stick strictly to the outline.
Mhm.
I'm guessing if you ask a lot of writing experts, they're going to say, outline it and stick to the outline. That's the point. But my intuition tells me if you really want to write something that wasn't in the outline, just do it. So that's what I do. But I believe it's powerful to use both abilities in your writing. But my point is that you flip between both types of thinking a lot, or you have to in writing. That you might do an outline that's logical, you might do intuitive writing, and then you might step back from the intuitive writing and reflect: is this all logically flowing together? Um, so, as you said, references are logical parts of it. You might do intuitive marketing where you sort of
Mhm.
free flow your writing and put it on Facebook or somewhere. So yeah.
And who's to say which one is going to have more impact? I think that's the other component here, that once you share that idea out there as a product, as a podcast, as an idea, as a service, you don't know what that idea is going to attract, who that idea is going to attract, what types of conversations, if somebody important is going to see it, if people are going to be triggered by it or no. But it's your responsibility as the storyteller, as the writer, to share those ideas and to be the messenger. And interestingly enough, I'm being brought to a story of how I went viral on TikTok, which is not related to storytelling. But I remember I was in the gym, and I almost had this intuitive knowing I need to go back and record a video.
Mhm.
And the idea wasn't as clear as I thought it was going to be. It was just like, go back home, you're going to receive what needs to be received when you start filming. And that was the video that generated a huge conversation online. It was connected to higher meaning. It was connected to humanity. But I didn't wake up thinking, "Oh, I'm gonna go viral today." I didn't spend my year thinking I want to go viral. I just spend the whole time thinking I want to be of service. I want to create something that's impactful. I want to help people. So the more you use your intuition, the more you're gonna realize that it is your intention that sets the tone for your intuition, because your intuition can work on so many levels. It can work at the level of the shame and the guilt and the anger and your trauma, but it can also work at the levels of inspiration and empowerment and inspiring whole nations. So the more you empower yourself, your intuition is going to meet you where you are, which I think it's a powerful side note for people who are listening.
Yeah, and I was reflecting on that recently, that in my opinion, intuition is generally speaking a positive force. So I don't know, like you mentioned, anger and shame and different ideas too. Um, that's something I don't know if what intuition experts think, but my inclination is to think that intuition is usually a positive guiding light in people's lives, but maybe it's possible to be steered wrong sometimes with it. Um,
Maybe you are right. Yeah. Maybe what I'm referring to is actually not quite intuition, but the voice of something that you attract when you're living at the lower frequencies,
mhm,
where you're really focusing on your own trauma, on your suffering, on your pain, and you're not seeing the light. So
right.
when you're operating in that dark for a really long time, you can get discouraged. And I suppose reconnecting with your intuition becomes even more difficult. But then you start hearing these voices, these ideas start to arrive to you that might not necessarily be positive in the world. So I really want to encourage people to believe in their ability to be positive change makers and to not be defined by their circumstances, whatever they may be, because some of the greatest and most impactful, most positive leaders they didn't have an easy life, and yet
Right.
they always believed in that, in their ability to shine as bright, which is kind of the source of that light in dark times. But speaking of receiving ideas, and whether we're in the dark times, whether we're in the light times, do you think that some ideas are simply destined for you? And I know we covered a little bit channeling and how do we actually, where do we channel from? And if it's from our higher self, then naturally we might think, oh yeah, I was always meant to channel that idea. But sometimes maybe we're trusted with ideas that are a little bit bigger than our understanding, and we're like, am I actually worthy of channeling this idea? I don't know if J.K. Rowling thought about Harry Potter that way when she received it, or maybe she thought, oh, yeah, that's just a story. But now that story is continuing to impact millions of people, children, adults worldwide. Maybe she was destined for it. Maybe she got lucky. But what's what we can say with certainty is that that idea was massive, and it's transforming us from within.
Yeah. I believe that. I believe I would have answered this question in many different ways throughout different phases of my
Mhm.
career, but I did feel the Awaken the Starlight Within project was somewhat unique, because I did feel it. I had that feeling many times that it seemed like these ideas are, I don't know, I can't verify where they're even coming from, and I've read a lot of books and a lot of stuff. This wasn't coming from there. You know, I wasn't reading some philosophy book trying to come up with an idea that went off of that. So sometimes, um, yeah, sometimes, as an example, sometimes I would drop my wife off at work, as I often did, and I still do usually. So I would drop her off at work. And then on the ride home, you know, something I mentioned earlier in our talk here, I would find myself alone, even though I'm driving and going home. It's a pretty easy route. It's pretty relaxed. And on that ride, sometimes I would just get many different ideas, and I would just make it my job to remember them so that I could note them all down when I got home. But I wasn't consciously trying to think of anything. It was early morning. I was probably even a little bit sleepy or something, or relaxed, or just my mind sort of went blank. And I think maybe that made it receptive to receiving something from somewhere. A part of it, of course, is myself. Like you said, maybe my intuition or my intent to want to gain certain insights that can help raise up humanity. That was sort of the core thinking that went into that book. Like, what are some insights that are not so easy to find everywhere else that I can share? And the truth was, there wasn't really that much of a reason I would have them. I mean, I'm an educated person. I've read a lot. I've traveled a lot. I've done a lot of different things. But even despite that, there wasn't really a particular reason why I should have special insights to share with the world that didn't already exist somehow in some other form. So I'm not saying the book is 100% unique and that there's nothing, you know, like, but at the same time, I believe if or when people read it, they'll find that, yeah, this is on the unique scale, this is a bit higher up. Um, so uh, basically, it did feel like that with me. That in some cases, some ideas were just destined to come in, and I don't know why or how or where they came from. But I think it starts with what you said. It starts with intuition, intention, letting go. I think you basically gave the recipe, because I'm pretty sure that's what I did without fully understanding that's what I was
Mhm.
doing.
And some might say this is also the manifesting process where you set the coordinates and then you receive it. But what we've been kind of lied to is that manifesting is about, oh, I want a brand new car, and then you receive that car. No, manifesting is about, how do you want to be of service? Hey, I want to be of service and I want to help the education industry. Great. You're going to be given a resource. You're going to be given an idea. You're going to be given a job to allow you to channel more of your potential in there. So I think there is a huge component around being of service when it comes to manifesting that a lot of people are bypassing. And I think they're bypassing the spiritual laws, but that doesn't mean that the spiritual laws don't. exist or not, they're not in place. It's just that the more we understand how to work with them, even the law of attraction, which is how a lot of writers are channeling their ideas, they're simply saying, I need something to help me to achieve X, Y, and Z. And that idea is what's allowing them to do that. But I agree with you that even when I wrote my book, some days I say I channeled it, some days I say I wrote it, because it literally arrived. I made space for it, it arrived. It is my story, like you've read, that I share things about my life as well as some insights. But in some way, somebody else might have written it, but in a different way, I suppose. But
Right.
I think this is what happens when people begin to channel or tap into their intuition. It's because they have proven themselves to be responsible to handle such fragile ideas or
Mhm.
such big ideas. Because in theory, anyone can write those, anyone could receive those ideas, but not everyone knows what to do with them in a way that they honor that the sacredness of that process. Because there are some people on earth, past, present, and future, I suppose, who are just not as graceful with handling people, ideas, projects. They just don't have that capacity in them. So if you happen to receive something, that means that you are ready to handle it with the care that it needs to be handled. Don't ignore your ideas. I think that's one of the main messages I want to leave people with. Your ideas, there's a reason they're arriving. And I've been in situations in my life when I was transitioning high school to university, university to my career trajectory, where ideas abandoned me.
Mm.
And I've talked about different reasons as to why that might be, but I know what it's like to not have the ideas. I know what it's like to ignore the ideas. And I know what it's like to be in constant flow.
I don't know what you mean though by ideas abandoned you. I don't know what you mean.
So I woke up one day. Well, it wasn't I woke up one day, but in hindsight, I realized what had happened is that there's nothing.
Mm. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you've lived your whole life with a heightened intuition and then that intuition was shut down,
Mm.
you don't see it at first because you think, oh, it's a little bit quieter than usual. But then you realize, oh, a part of me was taken away from me, or a part of me was shut down by something that I allowed in the vicinity, whether it was the wrong friendship, the wrong employment, whatever it was. I think it was a combination of things. But a part of me was so shut down, I wasn't even there. It took a couple of years to realize that. But these ideas are gifts, is what I'm trying to say. And so use them, handle them with great care. And so this takes me to a very interesting question, a playful question. What would you be if you weren't a writer? Have you considered that in the first place, or are
Yeah,
we
I have.
uncharted territory here?
Sometimes I've thought in a past life I was likely a philosopher because sometimes talking about ideas being destined for you, while I don't have, specific examples, I've been reading philosophy books at times, and I'm not good at remembering every single idea from every single philosopher, but I've read quite a few works through time, and sometimes I'll be reading some ancient Asian or Chinese philosophy or something, and I'll think, yeah, I've had thoughts exactly like this is weird. I've had thoughts precisely like this, and the reason I mentioned something like East Asian philosophy is there's no reason I would have run into it at any point in my life aside from like that particular book. So I just found the one book that has some idea where I'll think I've had, and then that's happened numerous times to me. I wish I would have written them down exactly when they happened and what it meant, but that's I don't document every single thought I've ever had, and then refer to books later on and say, oh yeah, I've had that thought. It's now in this. Like, it's not something people do. Um, but so I think I may have been and I'm sort of like jokingly saying that, in a past life I might have been a philosopher. I don't really know what can account for those things. These are supposed to be some of the highest level ideas that people have, and that these thinkers came up with. And then you have to ask, well, where did those thinkers come up with those ideas
Hmm.
anyway? So it's just, but in the modern age, I don't know if people really are philosophers nowadays. I think they get PhDs in philosophy, but that's a different matter. Um, I think I love being around books and ideas. So perhaps I'd be an editor. Perhaps I'd work in the publishing industry, helping writers in some form.
Or perhaps in a bookstore, just surrounded by books and
Yeah.
exploring different quests every single day. One of the ideas that came to me is that to be a channeler is to be a messenger of wisdom that is beyond your ears.
Hmm.
This was kind of how the sentence came to me as a phrase. And I think this is the best way to describe philosophers and storytellers that are channeling. We're tapping into a database of wisdom, and we are all connected to that wisdom when we do the work to reconnect ourselves. Nobody can reconnect you to something. This is not like the matrix where you get plugged into things and suddenly there isn't a USB stick that you can plug into yourself and suddenly you're connected. This is an inside job, an inside process of reconnecting with that. And I think how you qualify as worthy of being a channeler is whether you have these good intentions or no. And sometimes I think, because we're talking about intuition, we're talking about the dark side of intuition as well, is when people pretend to be empaths, or when people say, or when people have intuitive abilities but they don't use them for good, they use them to manipulate people. And
Yeah,
so
that's a good
this is
point.
this is where I really want to make it clear to people that you can develop your intuition, but sooner or later, if you don't have good intentions, you will experience consequences. And it's cool to be a good person. I don't know where we got this idea in this very narcissistic world that we live in, that it's cool to exploit people and manipulate them and get your way. Like, that does not give you any extra points in the universe or in the spiritual world. It just, maybe you get a brand new car because you got the promotion over somebody else, but that's not cool to be a bad person, a manipulative person. And so using your intuition with manipulative intentions, it always has consequences sooner or later. And the same
Yeah.
for positive, it always has consequences. So you think you're going to impact 5 people, but you actually impact 5 nations because you were brave enough to pursue that intuitive idea.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a big driving force behind my work on my book, and I'm sure it was for you as well. That we are people of light. You know, we're trying to spread some good in the world, and nobody's perfect. It doesn't always happen the way you think it would or the way you hope it would. But it's very important for people like us to encourage others to also find the inner good and spread that onto others and spread the light.
Spread the light as light workers, which is one of the ways we connected as well during the exploration of what it means to be that light worker. And this is a great opportunity to ask you, before we dive into the astrology and numerology, for a brief detour, what's it like being an intuitive writer? I don't think this is a title that many people have used on their journey as writers or as storytellers. I think it's an upcoming one. I think many more people are realizing the importance of honoring their intuition. So I think many more people will look into that path as their career trajectory. How would you promote it to them, I suppose, or introduce it to them?
I think it's about, like, I was actually going to say something earlier because multiple times you've mentioned the words like belief or trust. And to me, those words or those ideas are so important on the intuitive journey for anything, but also, of course, for being a writer. And I think that's what it's all about. You have to find it in you to begin to trust yourself. And I also um, come into another idea that you've been mentioning of things have consequences. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people do find that when they don't really tune into their intuition, when they don't really believe it or follow it, it can lead them down sort of bad territories or the wrong paths in life. I think the intuition is something inside us that's trying to keep us towards I would use that word, towards our destiny in a sense. I don't know if everyone believes in destiny. I don't know if I do every day, but it's sort of like the right word of
Mhm.
intuition is guiding you to where you really are meant to be. A deep part of yourself knows you're meant to be there. And that's what I would do with, that's what I do with my writing. I'm trying to figure out, um, yeah, where does this book almost want to be? Like, it's not just me. Where does this book want to be, and where do these ideas need to go? And it's very important to trust yourself as a writer, because it's very difficult to actually get anywhere if you don't trust in your own abilities, to find the right words, to find, as I said, everything is an intuitive process. The next words I'm going to say are driven through intuition. The next words I'm going to write on a page are driven through intuition, because the other idea doesn't make sense. You don't logically sit down and explore what's the next word that I'm going to put down. It doesn't work that way. Um, so yeah, it's a lot of self-belief, self-trust, and also trust in the source or the higher level beyond that connects all that. As you said, there may be a channeling potential that's going on there. And then you have to ask, what is channeling that, or where is that going? And we might not always know, but there's so
Mhm.
much trust that goes into it, because maybe you don't know where you're receiving your intuition or your messages, but you have to, it's just such a key part of trust. Allows you to go into the intuition, allows you to go into the creativity, which allows you to actually create a book or a piece of art, whatever it is somebody wants to create in life. Even if it's just creating your own life path. A lot of people get stuck on, what do I do next? Or where do I go? What's the relationship? What's the next job? And it can be tricky. You have to tap into your intuitive powers, and it's not always easy. And I hope people listen to me, because, as I said earlier, my path did not start as being some sort of intuitive great force. I mean, I was very logical, rational oriented, and gradually through time, I just realized I need to lean more and more and more into intuition, and that's the path that's been laid out for me.
I love this. It's you've tried out the journey using the logical mode on, but actually the intuitive mode on allows you to experience something that you cannot quite explain, but it allows you to channel more of you. There's that word channel again. And it's not necessarily that intentionally you want to channel it, it's just that a part of you wants to be expressed, and the intuitive mode or modality allows you to express that part of you that otherwise would be suppressed, I suppose.
Yeah,
Or
that's a really good way to put it. Yeah, that's exactly what it was for me. When I was younger, a lot of times I struggled through communication, and it started first with groups, especially, but even one-on-one communication, conversations were tricky, and that's why I keep going back to that example, that intuitively the next words out of your mouth are, it's an intuitive exercise, because I think I struggled so much with that, because maybe I was too um, looking for the next logical or reasonable thing to say, and it just didn't really work out so well all the time.
Hmm. It's the ego. I think to put it in a to give it a brief explanation before we dive into the next section of our conversation is the ego wants to be in control because the ego fears the unknown, and the ego fears the embarrassment. It fears the shame and the guilt, all the lower states of frequency where we're not meant to stay for a long time. We're just meant to experience them because they're part of the spectrum of emotions. So we've been conditioned to believe emotions are bad. I don't know who started it. I don't know why we bought into it, but that's what we believe in. We believe that showing our emotions is wrong. We believe that women are more emotional than men. And maybe that is so because they're more intuitive. So they're picking up on more of the emotions around us. And maybe it's because they've been allowed to explore their intuition a little bit more than men.
Mhm.
Maybe it's because men went to war and they had to suppress and shut down that emotional ability in order for them not to think about the consequences of what they're doing. Because that pain, if you destroy somebody else's life at a, generationally speaking, that pain still is there. Somebody needs to process that pain. And if your grandparents didn't feel that pain and your parents didn't feel that pain, you might be the one, the generational cycle breaker that has to deal with a lot of pain that's you don't even know where did this pain come from, but actually you doing that work at an emotional level allows you to reconnect with your intuition, and then that intuition allows you to channel ideas that your parents and grandparents didn't have access to because they refuse to unblock their emotional capacity. So that's a,
Yeah.
a short
Um,
intro.
Yeah, no, I think that you said some very powerful stuff there, and I'll go on record and say I do believe in, generally speaking, women have a higher intuition, and that's a funny thing that as my intuition levels have gone up gradually through time. That's something I started to pick up on. I started to realize generally in my life, or the women that I see have quite a bit higher intuition than the men. And before my intuition rose, I couldn't see that. It's like I was blind to being able to perceive that so well. Um, but so I would actually encourage men, anybody, but I would especially go out and encourage men to, don't take this lightly. Take a little bit of time to explore your intuition and see how you can grow this ability. And you might not find a guidebook, it might not be out there, but open up a conversation with your partner, with your wife, with your sisters, or and see, maybe they'll have something to share with you that will be useful on your intuitive expansion journey.
Absolutely. And your children. Your children are great messengers that kind of unlock your heart's ability to feel that unconditional love and also your intuition. And maybe that book that you're referencing, the Intuition Guide, maybe it's one of your books from the future.
Yeah,
We're just
yeah,
planting seeds here.
it very well could be. Yeah.
But I love that we need more mental voices, sorry, male voices for the mental health and intuitive abilities when it comes to changing the way men lead their lives, because the way that they lead their lives also translates into relationships at home and at work. And if we had more leaders that are tapped into their intuition, that would affect humanity for the better. So we'll all benefit if we were to tap into that intuition.
Mhm.
Which takes us to my favorite part of the conversation. No, I'm just kidding. I love every part of every conversation because we get to unlock so many beautiful insights. And I think our choices, whether they're conscious or unconscious or intuitive, they're always taking us closer to what we're here to achieve. But my theory is that numerology can help us figure it out a little bit earlier, or use a little bit of our logic and conscious mind to get there a little bit faster with more understanding. So, starting with your name, each letter, so the first letter of each name corresponds to a number. So, with your first name, that is 9, higher meaning. So, you're here to seek higher meaning with your path and inspire others to do the same. That's kind of like the main path that you're walking on. And you see there's 9 twice, which is the first path, which is kind of your potential being channeled, you understanding how to be your higher self. That is the first path, your purpose. The second path, your middle name, that has to do with what you're really good at already, and you're here to help other people awaken it in them, develop it further. So that is communication for you. Share your truth with the world and empower others to generate and share their ideas. So it's almost like this is your superpower that you're born with. You're kind of remembering it for the first few decades of your life, and then you're here to pass it on to the next people while you're committing to that path of higher meaning yourself. And then finally, your last name, which is kind of your language, how you're going to be connecting, your style. Once again, higher meaning. So infuse your work with higher meaning and use it to connect with others. So putting it all together, your life path is actually communication. So sharing your ideas, developing forums where people can share their ideas, opening the conversations, writing. This is the writer's path. This is also, in a way, the teacher's path, the speaker's path, the person that is brave enough to stand in front of people and share these ideas, even if they seem to contradict some of the beliefs, or maybe they seem to be too authentic suddenly. And you're like, whoa, where did you come from? What are these ideas? How dare you be so authentic in the world? But these are literally your instructions, who you're here to be and how you're here to be of service. So I think there is a lot of alignment already.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, communication is an interesting one. I like that. And I do. Writing is communicating. And I also believe that I should elevate do more things like this, and, do more speaking and engage with people in conversations more, and find the right people to do that with, in the right forums and for the right purpose. But all that work is highly worth doing. And, you might have sparked something here, because maybe this is a sign that I should put a little bit more attention and intention and intuition into communication, communication beyond just writing.
Yeah, it covers more than just writing, which is, I think, why sometimes we limit ourselves, because we think, I want to write. And for the longest time, I thought the same thing about myself. I was very comfortable exploring the writer's path of just writing, and sometimes even hiding what I've written. I was like, that's not ready to see the world yet. And then I was reminded, to be a storyteller is actually to share things with the world in whatever way, whether it's using your voice in a conversation, whether it's presenting people through a podcast episode, video, vlogging. All of that is communication. All of that is your language traveling and reaching people. And it's interesting that you have psychology in your profile, not here in your astrology bit. We're going to see that in a moment. But it's 3 is the number of conscious communication. It's the conscious mind. So it's a little bit closer to the logic. And that might signify that because you understand things from a higher perspective, from a deeper meaning, you're able to bring more clarity around those big ideas and bring those ideas a little bit closer to people at the everyday level of communication, which is where your voice matters even more, because you're able to almost awaken them like that. Like, you say one thing, and that one thing, it stays with them as they're driving their car, to use your example, and they're like, oh, this is something that Isaac said. Now it makes sense. So our words, our stories naturally matter, but when you have the communication as your life path, then that is kind of your greatest legacy and the greatest way to be of service. But I did mention that we have psychology in your profile, which is using the astrology. And my method of using numerology kind of connects to the houses and the life paths, because I think they are connected. And looking at all the elements, because the way that wherever you have a different element, it showcases a different modality. So if you have more earthly energy, that's more actions. If you have more air, that's ideas, that's communication. If you have the water, that's more community and empathy and just allowing things to flow. There's not that much structure. And then the fire, these are the real disruptors of society, where even their presence, without them having to speak, they're so energetically charged with something that is far beyond our understanding, that they naturally shift the status quo. So in your case, we have Gemini in the first house in the sun sign. So this is your higher self identity, who you need to become in order to accomplish your purpose, the way that I view the sun sign. And it's in the third house, communication. So direct alignment with your life path. And Gemini is the conversation starter. Of all the signs, this is the person that loves and thrives actually in conversations. This is their domain where they get to make the greatest impact. The moon sign is the existing identity. This is more of the comfort zone. This is where you're likely going to spend the first 20, 30 years of your life. And you're kind of revisiting that identity, I suppose, blueprint, in order for you to truly embody it so that you can pass it forward. And this is psychology. So naturally, it showcases the conscious and the subconscious a little bit here. With the moon sign, you're more into the conscious. You're like, oh, this makes sense. I'm going to follow that. The energy is more around actions, doing things, meeting people and going to places and learning. With the sun sign, you're trusting the process. The sun sign might be a little bit more unfamiliar because it's not your natural domain where you spend the first 20, 30 years of your life, but it's the sun sign that allows you to channel your potential. Now, the moon sign works with the south node. Your south node is the existing knowledge. What you're here to unlock and use is your inner knowledge. So your moon sign, the first 20, 30 years, you're acting out of that identity in order for you to remember your south node knowledge, which is Scorpio, which is the depth. And the transformation house is about the self mastery. It's about constantly changing and advancing your understanding about what it means to change. So, with the psychology and the transformation, you can see how you've used that psychology blueprint or identity blueprint to understand how to transform yourself and help others to do that. Sun sign works with the North Node. And the good news is that we still have that earth energy, which has to do with actions. The difference between Virgo and Taurus is the Virgo is the kind of self-growth oriented actions, whereas Taurus is literally just about the resources, and it is in that house as well. So your North Node is what you're here to learn and complete as your higher purpose connected to your soul purpose, I suppose, and creating resources as the communicator, which is super in alignment with that writer's path, the intuitive writer. The rising sign is your communication style, how you're going to connect with the rest of the world. So Pisces, this is the most intuitive sign in the sense that it's the 12th. So 12 is the house of spirituality. Your rising sign being in the Pisces tells me that you have a huge emotional intelligence, huge emotional ability. Not everyone has the ability to resonate with people, connect with them to the depths that you have, whether you've consciously explored that, whether you're consciously aware of that. It's just there. Like a little bit like your South Node allows you to go into these huge depths when it comes to the research, when it comes to dealing with flowing with the information. But with a rising sign, you can bring that into the conversations with people. And finally, the Venus sign is your love language. So, how are you going to form bonds with others on a deeper level? So, these are your soul tribe members, these are collaborators, partners, business partners, your friends, your inner circle. And what's crucial here is that you are kind of the initiator, you're the leader in that space. The more you allow yourself to lead, to share who you are, to channel your truest self, the more you're going to strengthen these bonds. Any surprises?
Uh, a lot of it. I mean, I didn't even realize psychology would be in these signs. That's kind of, it's very interesting that that's there because yeah, that is what I spend a lot of my time studying. But if I understood, you're saying that. Were you saying that that's sort of like what I've already done? That this is already showing that that's something that I had already focused on in the past, or not necessarily?
It's a little bit like that. The best way to explain it to people is whether they believe in past lives or no. It's that this is your past identity. So you're coming back to Earth and you're spending the first chapter of your life, however long that is, 10, 20, 30 years, to really remember all of that, to move beyond the conditioning, the limiting beliefs, and to reconnect with all that you are, to embody all of that, to integrate all the pieces so that you can just transfer it forward and help people with it. Whereas your sun sign, it's a different type of energy that it's not as familiar to you. I'll give an example. For me, my moon sign is an air sign in the house of psychology. So I was very comfortable just being surrounded by books about higher knowledge. But my sun sign is an earth sign in the eighth house. So the more I do, the more I act, the more I focus on my routine, my habits, and these actions and these invitations, the more I'm in alignment with my sun sign. For you, it's the other way around. It's speaking that kind of brings you closer to that higher self.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's very interesting to me. It does make me reflect on some things, and I think when I was younger, I was kind of especially hard on myself with my communication abilities or conversations and things like that. But when I think of it, maybe it was just me trying to have a very, very high standard of it. Like maybe for some reason that was something in my sign or in my chart that was that I had a very high standard for that, and so I felt like maybe I wasn't beating the mark, but yeah, there was something there, and I have connected with some people in life very fast, and where they're telling me things about their lives or asking me for advice on any variety of, even on random flights I've been on. Sometimes I'm sort of giving people advice on stuff. Um, but my only point with that was that yeah, sometimes I feel like if I reflect on it, there's been many times when I like very quickly and easily and smoothly connected with people, and certainly I find that happening more often, but in my more recent life. But I've been more consciously trying to go in that direction. But yeah, I find it pretty interesting, and it sort of feels like it could make sense. Um, the leadership, I believe that, yeah, the path forward for somebody like me, an author, is yeah, you have to step into your leadership. You have to not be scared to speak your mind and to direct or guide or involve yourself and relate with other leaders, thought leaders, or people who have big ideas in mind for the planet and for the world and for humanity.
Hmm.
Uh, so leadership does it makes a lot of sense, and I haven't always stepped into that as much as I should. I'd say the same with communication. So I find it quite interesting, and the fact that psychology is in there, like it's quite interesting as well. And the slide before this on the higher meaning, and I already what was that? Sorry, I
The
forgot the other.
communication, yeah. I'll bring it back into perspective.
Yeah.
So the first path, that's nine, that's the higher meaning. And so
Mhm.
you put together the sun sign, which is kind of the identity, and north node, which is the purpose. So what you're here to do and focus your energy, or kind of understand the niche or the filter through which to interpret that soul purpose. So here to be a legacy storyteller. So use your inherent curiosity to lead people on quests for finding more meaning and purpose in life. So combining the first path with the sun sign and the north node, and kind of defining them, understanding more about that. Then the middle path, which is communication, is how you're here to help others, because it's who you are already. You're not advancing that anymore. It's just who you are. Like, even if you were to read more books, you're not going to unlock more of who you are, because you're already limitless in a way. But what you're testing out in this lifetime, what you're getting becoming a master of, it's the first path, which is the higher meaning and searching for more. So with the second path, with your moon sign in Virgo with psychology, and south node in Scorpio, so you're here to be a transformational guide. So guide people into the subconscious mind and help them redefine their identity and mission on earth through self mastery. And the books that you've been writing, they're already helping with that naturally. um, but I suppose what's coming with the first path is that you might channel things into the world, share ideas into the world that you haven't even considered just yet, things that are handed to you almost like gifts, with which you can present them to other people on their paths as gifts on their journey, to help them see more of how they can be of service. And finally, that expression, the third path of higher meaning again. I've used the word intuitive channeler, but again, words, they're not meant to be labels that define us, but labels that empower us to rise above. So let your spiritual nature shine through your storytelling, for it is your own higher self that narrates the stories, which I suppose is an answer to one of your questions earlier in this conversation. Who are we channeling when we're channeling? And this was the sentence that came through when I was putting the slides. It is your own higher self that you're channeling. And with Aries in the first house, I do want to mention that the first house isn't just about leadership, it's also about the identity and the self. So, leading by example, not necessarily leading a lot of people, but leading by example, being that strongly rooted in your beliefs, because your belief system is based on something that is greater than just logic. And that ties it all together.
Yeah, it makes sense. I believe that this helps put some puzzle pieces together of how my life has unfolded and maybe will continue to unfold.
It will be interesting to follow your journey and what comes through your storytelling. As always, I like to say that one is not born to their purpose, one steps into their purpose. And it's the choices that we take. It's whether we accept the ideas. Sometimes the ideas arrive to us and we don't want to accept them because we don't feel ready. That's okay. There will be another time to attempt to be in alignment, but I think you'll find that once you go into alignment with your higher self, with your soul purpose, with your mission on earth, the easier life becomes for you, because you just get to share all that you are. And you've already started working on your legacy. These are some of the ideas that have already been grounded onto earth. I'm sure that you have many more. What is next? What can people expect from you in 2025, since we're at the start?
Yeah. So my next book idea, or that I'm already working on it, but my next book topic, um, sort of is a different type of book because it sort of combines ideas from everything else I've done while still completely introducing something new. And I think I mentioned this to you in the
Mhm.
past in another chat. But so the next book topic will be on using chess and how that can impact our lives, or how that can help us elevate our lives and use it as a tool to elevate our lives. Um, and like, there's many ideas I'm still working on with the book, but to give one idea of something that might be, explained, or something I might go through in the book, is that for people who know a little bit about the rules, you have many pawns and pieces in the game. And the pawns throughout the game, they want to get to the end so that they can promote into something else. And I view that as like, it's basically a transformative journey. Like, it seems sort of weird to describe it that way because it's just a game where you move these pieces on a board, but it's a transformative journey, and the pawn at the end can become any other piece or anything that it wanted to be. I'm sort of personifying the pieces, but it sort of gets the idea across that. Um, and I think that's a similar message I would tell people in life, that a lot of people, and I'd say regardless of status, regardless of country or whatever, I have the impression that a lot of people feel like they're in a sort of lowly status. And I don't mean, a person could be wealthy. I'm not even talking specifically about money or specific life status. Um, but sometimes people just feel lost or confused, or they don't have the right resources, whatever it may be. So a lot of us might feel sort of like pawns in life. And but so that's a message that'll get through in the book, that regardless of where you start off, I personally believe that you can find the way to elevate yourself to a higher not status as in societal status, but a higher level, a higher ability, unlock things in you that you didn't know you had. And one tool that you can unlock simply through this video, this chat that we've had today, is intuition, of course, which you can practice intuition and reason and logic and so many different mindsets and mental abilities through the game of chess. So that's one of the reasons I'm attracted to the game and what it can do for us as people. Um, but I understand it's not for everybody, chess, but it's something that I'm drawn to, and that I believe I can, help elevate people through that game. And it's sort of like I've sort of said what I wanted to say in a lot of my other books. So it's maybe just a fun detour for me. And then after this book, who knows? I really like the idea of going deeper into intuition, actually. So this topic here might spark something else on its own.
Mm. I love that you mentioned that chess isn't for everybody, but intuition is. And
I
so
think I should clarify. I think it should be, everybody should be open to it, but I'm saying I'm aware of the reality that not everybody's a chess player, not everybody's interested. So I understand that too.
yeah, and sometimes we go through seasons in life where we're more attracted to logical games, advancing a little bit more of that intuitive or logical thinking versus like spending more time at the level of the thinking. And there are seasons where we just want to play, so engaging more of the physical body and teamwork.
Mhm.
So when you find yourself in a season where there's a little bit more of the mind games involved, I think your book might be helpful to help people bend the rules almost. And it's not necessarily bending the rules as in chess, but in life.
Mhm.
Because sometimes the rules that we live by are simply false restrictions that we believe in. They're not necessarily the truth, but we live our life based on the parameters that society told us that it's safe for us to explore, or even our own ego said that's your comfort zone, this is the gameplay. You don't go outside of it because it's not safe. Well, actually, if life is that chessboard, you can go anywhere because you're not the pawn and you don't have someone moving you. You have that
Yeah.
ability to move yourself. And
And now that I think of it, now that you just said pawn, that flashes me back to realizing that I'm just about certain in your book you use that word somewhere. And it's like it's I've been seeing chess references everywhere. And a lot of people in self-help or in spirituality or pretty much any domain at some point use it as a reference point because it's so there's something about chess that I think is in the system. And obviously I understand pawn can also, it doesn't necessarily have to mean chess specifically, but it's a direct part of the game. And yeah, I do believe that we can all. It's just something I noticed that you use that in your book too. So I'm seeing these references everywhere because I'm working on the book. So when you work on something that your intuition
Mhm.
is driving you towards, then you start to see it everywhere, and it starts to like the message. You start to receive more, perhaps channeling, or you start to receive certain
I think
um, inspiration.
it's designed to encourage us that we're on the right track. Until we are finished with something, we see it almost as a reminder, keep going, good job, you're doing it. And
Mhm.
once, and I'll say this, when I was working on my book, I started working with the dragons. So there was a lot of dragons everywhere. And it was the year of the dragon as well. So naturally, I kind of tune into that global frequency. Interestingly enough, a week ago, well, at the start of the year, I saw this reference to a snake, and I didn't know this is the year of the snake. But I'm
Oh,
working on my next book, and that is the spirit guide that wants to work with me. It's the snake. So snake
ah,
usually has that connection to healing, to shedding.
mhm.
So shedding
Yeah.
the skins that no longer service, as we're ready to be of service. And I think when we awaken, when we want to become better versions, more authentic, more honest versions of ourselves, we find that there's a lot of shedding that needs to happen. These
Mhm.
labels that we've used, these beliefs, we need to get rid of them in order for us to truly show up in the world as who we are. So I'm excited to read more chess references as part of your storytelling because I think it is a universal thing, as you mentioned.
Mhm.
Some of these words, they're not just in chess, they're used in life as well.
Right, absolutely. And I'm also excited to see your I read this book and it was wonderfully done. Your No One Knows Me and the Dragon Edition. And I think about I think a little bit more about dragons too here because they're also in Game of Thrones. I mean, they're in a lot of different things, and I think it might help some people to start perceiving their own inner potential. Like if you can sort of perceive that you have sort of these dragon abilities that you don't really always tap into. But I think we all have a larger than life potential that we don't fully understand. And so if you can acknowledge, if you can understand that maybe that is out there, that might be like not you, but anybody.
Yeah.
If you can perceive that, then you can start on that path. But if you don't open your mind to the possibility that there's something so much greater in store for you, then it's hard to begin on that path. But and it all interrelates because the pawn can in some form graduate to transform. Maybe one day there will be a dragon edition of chess. We'll see.
Do you know, there's a reference that I'm seeing or I'm being reminded of from channeling is the reference that sometimes we're pawns in the divine hand, but that doesn't mean that we've given up our power. It's more to do with maybe somebody is needed in a particular industry, is needed in a particular company because they are the only person that can get through the illusions or get through to the heart of the leader. So it
Mhm.
might feel like you are choosing a career path that is paying less or a career path that seems to contradict your journey so far. But that is you honoring that intuition that is telling you, hey, I need you to go and do this thing because that thing is going to allow for deep healing to happen, for deep transformation to happen. And we're never playing the game of life alone. We're always in this together. So if one of us decides to be the symbolic pawn in the hands of the divine, that means that we're ready to be of service. And sometimes the way that we're being of service or the way that we're asked to be of service differs from our expectations. That doesn't mean that we're doing anything wrong or anything lesser than our abilities. If anything, it's making room for us to be reintroduced into society for all that we are. So
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that completely. Yeah, we're all, you've said that multiple times too, or you've hinted at that idea. And I believe at the end of the day, we're all we're all moving parts of a cohesive system that works together. And we all have to be of service to something greater, something that's for good, for the light,
Mhm.
for human empowerment and knowledge and deeper understanding, empathy, intuition. I think we intuitively all know what goes into that, or what, because I could probably list out 100 more topics that we all need to elevate ourselves in. But that's what it is. We need to intuitively understand and grasp what are those higher ideas that we can all leverage and use and lift each other up with, and then get into those things. Today it might be intuition. Tomorrow you might say, let's look into empathy. But the key thing
Mhm.
is to keep working on growing and lifting yourself up and others along that path as well.
Yeah, it's the curiosity, and I love that our connection to intuition is almost unlocking a different connection, imagination. Especially
Mhm.
as we were talking about the dragons, I could almost see that if we were to embrace imagination as part of our daily experience on earth, the kind of stories that we're going to tell, the kind of conversations we're going to have, the kind of philosophy for life we're going to develop, it's going to be magical. And that magic doesn't have to be using wands like in Harry Potter, or
Right.
communicating in reality with dragons as in Game of Thrones. But what if we were to introduce those symbols into our everyday use of language and our everyday communication with people? So I think
Yeah,
maybe we're gonna have you back on Born to Do It, and we're gonna be covering imagination. I think this
that would be
might be a
fantastic.
glimpse into the future.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
It was lovely to connect, Isaac. Thank you for guiding the way. Thank you for trusting your intuition and reminding us of the power of intuition with your words. And yeah, I'm excited to see what you unlock in 2025, because I'm sure the chess game, there's a reference, the end game brings a
Mhm.
lot of revelations, and that metamorphosis that you're describing, once it transforms you, you'll be a brand new writer after that book, as it happens with everything that
Absolutely.
we
Yeah.
deliver.
I'll aim to transform other people's lives, but you made a really good point earlier that when we write these books, if we do a good job and tap into our intuition, it transforms us too. But yeah, it's been a great honor to be here with you, and I'm glad that we've been able to have this important conversation and share that with all of your audience and all of the listeners.
Yeah, thank you for watching and listening wherever you tuned into Born to Do It.